helpful in the grant writing process. If there's something that you have a question on or you want to talk about, it's totally informal. So just speak up or raise your hand, and we'll get started. I think. Here we go. I think it just froze up on us. There we go. Okay, so these are the things that I'm going to go over with you today. We're going to talk about the stages of proposal development. We're not going to get too deep, but there's actually a formula that works really well when you're thinking about writing your proposal, a framework for putting it all together when you're gathering information. So we're going to go over some of that. We're going to talk about common pitfalls or mistakes, things that come up more often than not, and then talk about generating a need statement or a statement of need, however you want to say it. We're going to talk about program evaluation and some of the points that are important. I know that's a big part of your reporting, and we're going to talk about some ways that hopefully everybody can maybe feel a little less overwhelmed when the reporting is due. And then we're going to go over your responsibilities as a potential grantee, as well as Leanne's responsibilities and Coleman's responsibilities to you guys as potential grantees. Okay. Has anybody heard of the 3 stages of proposal development before? Because it's really exciting material, I know. So the first stage that we generally talk about in grant writing is ideation. And basically, it's just what it says, coming up with your idea. Most of you are already there, unless you're creating a new program or a new project. You already know what you're doing. But in this process, this is something that usually takes place in a meeting like you just had here, in a staff meeting, in a volunteer meeting, where you're going to really just sit down, take a pen to a paper or to a laptop or an iPad, however you do it, and you're going to talk about what the needs are for your program. And the biggest part of this, I think, is identifying who benefits. There's a general understanding of what your audience is and your survivors, but who exactly is that to you? Each of you are here because you serve just a little bit of a different slice of that pie, and you need to know who that is so that you can create a program around that or write about your program in a way that identifies them. Because if we're getting proposals and all of you are serving the exact same slice of the pie, then we're not spreading ourselves out evenly enough, and we want to make sure that you're doing that. The second piece is, what is your capacity? So you want to serve a certain population, the homeless population or whoever you're serving, but actually how many people can you serve? Well, we can only serve X number without having to create a whole new program, or we only serve the Hispanic population, or they're this percentage of who we serve. And really understanding what your capacity is to do that and being honest with yourself, I think, is something that's important in the ideation phase, because you might want to say, oh, we want to serve all breast cancer survivors in Utah. Well, you as 4th Street Clinic don't have the capacity to do that. So how can you get that done? So narrowing that down, I think, is an important piece of not getting ahead of yourself. And it's also a really great place to have conversation with maybe the people who aren't involved in the grant writing process, but who always have a really good idea. And they come to you and say, oh, we have to do this, or this is a program I want to implement. And you have to be able to say, well, we don't have the money, or we only have 6 volunteers until our organization grows. And so understanding that capacity piece will help you narrow down the idea and the project that you want to get funded. And then the third piece is someone else doing what you're doing. And is it relevant? So you want to maybe provide a certain service to survivors, or some sort of counseling or therapy or holistic treatment, but is somebody else already doing that? So why would you? What can you do that's better than what they're doing, that they're not doing, or how can you partner with them maybe to do that? And I think especially on the grant reviewing side, if we're looking at 10 applications and everybody's doing the same thing, not everybody's going to win. So that's an important thing to think about. Any questions on that? Okay. We're going to go through these first 3 stages, and then we'll get into some more question and answers. But these will set us up for what we're doing. And then following through on the ideation, you're going to come to the development phase. So you have your ideas. We think we have the capacity to do this. We have a little bit of funding. We would love to get so much more from Komen or this foundation or this donor to be able to do it. Now, how do we sell them on it? Why are we so important, and what is the case for support? Why do we need this now and not next year? Why are we qualified to do this and not the organization next door? And so this is kind of the fun part if you're a grant writer, the maybe not so fun part if you have 12 other jobs at your organization, where you're working together all your data and your stories, and you're talking to program people or yourself if you are the program person, and figuring out exactly what you need. So my goal is to serve 100 more people this year through our program. That's going to cost me $8,000 more. And this is the stage where you really pull that all together. And that goes into your case too. And you're working internally. Like I said, so you're running around, you're grabbing people in meetings, or you're pulling data that maybe you had from an annual report or last year's application. You're looking at that data to say, okay, what do we need to do to improve on that? And then at this point, you're going to talk about your goals and objectives, and we'll go into that in a little more detail in a minute. But this is the development phase where kind of all the stuff gets pulled on the table, and you sort out the cards of the data and the stories, and understanding what your needs are going to be for that. Does that make sense? And then, of course, everybody loves the cost-benefit analysis, and that's the big piece of it. Is it worth it to do it? So you want to serve 100 more people, but is it going to cost you more money in the end than it's worth? And obviously, it's a tough subject when you're working, I think, with survivors, because everybody deserves the help and everybody needs a resource. But if your organization is going to be crippled by it in some way, then you're not able to do the other part of your job or the other program that you're working on. And so you have to weigh the cost and the effort that you're going to put into it, and is the outcome on the other side that you expect going to be worth it. And that's a big part, I think, with especially smaller organizations. You know, because you work with your clients and you work with survivors, maybe more than some larger organizations do who are doing proposal development. And so you want to so badly, and you're so passionate about it, but at the end of the day, the numbers aren't going to add up. You know, it's going to cost you $10,000 more than you have, or you're going to be in the negative at the end of the day. So then you kind of go back to your stage one and start over. And of course, that's what your board is wanting to know too. Is it worth it? So. And then stage 3, your writing and submission process. So this is where you follow all the guidelines. You do reviews before you edit. Some people have the capacity where they have 3 or 4 people who work closely with them who can look over the application. I get that that's not always the case, but I would strongly suggest that you try to find somebody, a board member, even a volunteer. It doesn't need to be someone who has a grant writing experience, but who's going to take this document. And I know it's hard because it's on GEMS online, but print something out. You could put it in Word, which is kind of how I always do online applications. As many years as I've done them, they still freak me out. If I don't save, or I go back too fast, or my internet stops, or I get an email or another program, or my Pandora goes crazy, and and something's bound to happen. So I usually create it in Word, and then I cut and paste it.
And that's always my recommendation to everyone, is do it in Word first and then copy and paste.
Oh, I've been there, done that, and there's nothing more gut wrenching than seeing everything. Or like the first sentence that you wrote, and where are the 30 others? Like, it's gone. It didn't save. So that's where you can do the review with your team. Put it in Word. If they're not willing, or they're not wanting to look at the whole thing, give them the parts that maybe you're struggling with or you'd love feedback on. It's kind of like when you're in high school and they say, like, let your parents read your paper, your brother, your sister, or a friend. Like, do they understand it? Same thing. Can just anybody understand what you're talking about? Granted, you're going to have some technical information, especially when it comes to maybe statistics or specific diagnosis or follow-up care, they don't need to know that, but can they understand what you're talking about and what you're asking for? Sign off and approvals, and this is just a kind of a timing thing. If you need a board signature, which I know you guys need approval after you send it in, someone's got to approve the proposal. Give them a heads up. So you want it done by Friday. Check in with them on Monday. Say, hey, this isn't in there. I need you to get it done by Friday. Give yourself some time, because there's nothing worse than not getting that board signature and having to either send it in or not have a complete application. And that happens on paper ones too. I'm working with a client right now, and I'm like, how are we going to track this person down? We've got to go find them because this is due. And so give yourself a few days to do that. Try your very best to submit before the deadline. That's one of my best pieces of advice. Whether it's here, I know you have a one-person resource department, and so certainly she was taxed. But I find this on lots of applications. I have one that's due tomorrow, and I was up very early this morning working with a client before I came in saying, you got to get this in today because tomorrow's kind of our cushion, is what I call it. So if something goes wrong today, I'm not going to be late, but I have one day tomorrow to fix any mistakes, excuse me, that come up on their end. So before the deadline's going to give you as much advantage as you can. And even a few days in your brain, it's due Friday, well, it's due in my office on Wednesday. It's really going to make a big difference. And then you can relax. And then if you don't get I do this even with some of the big ones, like Eccles and a few others, follow up with them. If you don't hear back that you didn't get your confirmation email or you had a glitch or something that's funny, follow up and say, hey, this didn't come through, and don't wait till after the deadline and say, oh, well, I submitted it, because you'll go to the bottom of the pile. And that's happened, and I'm not just saying here, but that's happened some other places too. So, and that's my advice for the writing of submission. Follow the questions, and we'll get into some more of the detail, but these are tried and true pieces of advice. Any questions? Okay, so I've been doing grant reviewing and consulting with big organizations and small organizations, and sometimes I'll pop into an organization and they've been working with another grant writer, and so I'm handed grants that I didn't write but I'm reviewing, or someone will call and say, hey, we've been writing this, but we would just like your review on it before we submit. Would you do that for us? And I always enjoy being the reviewer, but at the same time, it's places where I find some pitfalls and things. And in this next part, I pulled together some quotes. These are not from me, but from other grant reviewers who have reviewed applications, and this is some of their feedback. And I know you guys all get feedback, correct, on your proposal, whether it's about the scope of the program or elaborating in certain sections. But I've seen this more often than not, that, for example, I read this whole proposal and it's still not clear what you're trying to achieve. It truly happens. And there are books and books and samples where you will read a whole application and they've cut and paste, their best PR and their marketing language, and tells all about who they are. They have a really emotional story about one of their clients, but you have no clue what they're trying to do. So keep that in mind. It means sometimes you'll put a great budget in and your numbers will be there, but it doesn't have anything to do with the program you're asking for support. So you put in your organization's budget, but you're asking for program support of $10,000 and you didn't include a program budget. So you have to create one if you don't have one. And don't assume that the reviewer is going to be able to understand your organization's budget or piece out what that means for your program. And there are samples online, there are samples in books, and it's just, budgeting is scary because it's numbers and we're not finance people, most of us, when we're writing a grant. But it's kind of like balancing your checkbook, if you still have a checkbook, or creating a budget at home. You just put down your expenses and you put down your income for the program, and you like to think that they're going to balance at some point. But what you want to show is how the money is going to be spent. And so keep in mind, if I'm asking for $10,000 to serve 100 new people this year, that the budget you have is going to reflect that, and it's not going to be something for another program or just your organization. Which leads to the data you provided has nothing to do with the project you are trying to support. I have seen this, I've read it, where you're going to provide data for perhaps, again, your entire organization because the numbers look really good. You served 500 people last year, but your new program's only going to serve 25 specific individuals. But you kind of cushion it because 25 doesn't look as good. Some people do that, and it's not going to make sense. The reviewer may not know your program, but they're smart enough to figure out numbers. And so I think having data, again, data is a scary word sometimes, like budget, but I think it's just a count. You know, what are you going to provide, and how can you put numbers to that? And I think by the nature of the work that you guys are doing, you're kind of in a numbers world sometimes. How many years? Some of the good questions you guys were just talking about the Hispanic population that you're serving. You know how many. You can put numbers to it, and that's your data. It could be someone, your program staff can tell you that. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated with pie charts or graphs. Always helpful, but make sure the data that you're putting in there actually reflects what your needs are. Because sometimes when you're skimming as a reviewer, you're going to look at the data first, and then if you read the narrative and it doesn't make sense, you're lost. So, you know, either way, whether they're looking at data or reading your narrative, make sure whoever's reviewing that for you is going to understand what your needs are.
So is that helpful when you're creating that data? Like, for instance, I have one program that we are providing quite a bit of service in that specific area, but there's also a deficit where we have people on a wait list. Mm-hmm. Would providing that information that we have X number of people waitlisted because we don't have the funding to provide that service beneficial?
Absolutely. Okay. Because that tells me as a reviewer not just who you're serving, but who you, going back to the beginning, have the capacity to serve, or don't have the capacity to serve unless you get the funding. So if you're going to tell me I have 100 people on the wait list who, unless I get $10,000 this year, I cannot serve. That's compelling to me as a reviewer, and it shows you already have a connection to the people, that they want your services. You're not just casting a wide net and hoping you catch them. Like, you know who they are. They're here waiting. That's huge. So that's a very good point. The data about who you serve, but also looking statistically, and I'm going to point on you because you're with the state, so I'm assuming you guys work with a lot of numbers. Who don't you serve and why? Like, there's some great information, as you know, from working with Komen about, I heard you, I was standing right there talking about statistics and numbers and data and what are we pulling. Go, pull the statewide numbers, compare yourself. And I know a lot of you already do that, and Huntsman does a good job of that. But in the state, there are, and we talked about this, I remember when we were doing the profile, we know how many kind of have a general strong guesstimate of who needs the services in the state. How many are you serving? What is your percentage of that pie? So that's, I think, a really good point. We could serve so many more if we had the money, and that's what you want to get at. Okay, let me go back before we get into this. So you've actually done a great segue for us. Something that I've found has been incredibly helpful to me, even after all these years of doing grants, is going back to a need statement or a statement of need. Has anybody heard of this, seen the words together? You don't, unless you're kind of in the grant world, it's not something that's talked about too much, but I think it's very common sense. You go, oh yeah, we do that, or yeah, we talk about that, or yeah, we write that. But maybe we don't always take the time to put it on paper. And as a fund development person, it's something that I like to do and share with my boards or share with a volunteer committee who's working on this to say this is what we're really doing. So a needs statement is just that. It could be just a few sentences. Sometimes it's an elevator speech for an organization. Sometimes it's a longer paragraph that you're putting in your grant proposal. But what it's going to talk about is what is the problem you're actually addressing. So obviously breast cancer as a whole is what you're looking at. But what is, 4th Street Clinic is going to have a different problem than Alliances and then Cancer Wellness is. Each of you have a different problem within the larger scope of breast cancer survivorship. And then who is affected by the problem? Breast cancer survivors, but who are you working with and how are they affected differently? Again, data. What data can you use? There's got to be numbers. You know how many people you're serving each year. That's your data. Or how many people you want to be serving or could be serving. Like you were talking about the Polynesian population. That would be great data. If you could pull that, and I can give you some, like the Census Bureau, census.gov, if you guys ever use that, you can get on and you can pull actually the reported Polynesian population in Utah, and you could get some numbers from that. It's a good, like, slow Friday afternoon project when you want to get on the census.gov site. And then what is this, I think, is the largest part of the need statement that really is going to set you apart from the people you're competing, or the organizations that you're competing with when the grants are being reviewed. It's what gap is your organization or your project filling? To me, it's so what, really, that you serve breast cancer survivors, but what are you doing that isn't being done somewhere else? That you deserve the money that the donor who walked in here wants to see put to good use. And that element is really what I see in reviewing, and even in my own writing, that I have to keep saying, what are we doing that's so, like, I'm passionate about it, and I know it's great, but what are, like, if we weren't here, if your organization weren't here, what hole would be left? So what are you filling? And that's a good way to look, it's a good way to look at it. If you didn't exist, what gap would you leave behind? Therefore, what gap are you filling? And that tends to be helpful. And that's a great kind of conversation piece, too, to have with a small group or your program staff or your board. You get so engulfed sometimes in, like, the work that you are committed to doing, the work that you have to be doing every day, that you kind of forget, well, if we weren't here, what would be going on for these people? So I think it's on the second half of, there's a single paper in the packet that you were given. I'm going to leave it here so you can look at these questions. That I begged and borrowed and stole from a great resource called the Foundation Center, which they're totally okay with. This is something I've used in the past, and I didn't even rework it because I love it so much. We're going to have you guys kind of work through a needs statement, because I think that might be a good way to come up with some questions that I can answer, or even Leanne can answer in relation to the expectations of the grant proposal. So I will read through this quickly. I think we'll just do the first half, the first page that goes 1 through 3, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll flip it over a little bit. But what this has provided you, well, I'll back up a little bit. So if you're really energized when you walk out of here today, which I hope you are, I'll give you some resources. But the Foundation Center has, like, online webinars and trainings that if you have the time, which most of you, this is a big deal for you to be here, and I understand that. But if you had extra time, they do provide some online training courses, and this is part of one of their sessions. So you'll see it says online proposal writing course at the bottom. So they go through several hours of webinar training. But what they've provided you is some questions to go through. And these are the questions that I use personally when I'm writing. And they've given you an example answer to each question. So the first one is, what is the need for the project, which we just talked about? And is it a serious problem or issue, or lack of needed service? So there's a gap. And the example that they give is Hamilton County elementary students are reading below grade level. So there's your problem or issue. Students leave the elementary schools unprepared for more advanced studies. The average elementary school student in the district reads 2 grade levels below his own. And so what they've provided you is the need and the issue and the lack of services. So if you want to take a minute and read through these, then I won't read all the questions because you all can do that yourself. And we'll talk about maybe some of the challenges in writing it for yourself. So just a couple sentences of your own organization.
So there's not a lot of dead space. No, it's okay. There you go. Yeah, it's just this little button right down here at the bottom. So stop recording, and then when you hit it again, it starts again. Okay. Yep. So just right here.
Okay. All right. So what do you guys think about doing that? Is it helpful? Scary? Does anybody want to share maybe what they got? I know it's hard when you're not in your office and you can't pull the data sheet or something. I don't know if anybody would want to. Yeah.
I made it as far as number 1.
That's okay. I know you're going to get to take this home though, so you can do it in your free time.
And I did write on my paper so I can make copies.
Oh, well, look at you, resourceful.
So I have cancer patients and their families face significant financial, emotional, spiritual, and physical challenges during and following treatment. Services in the community to address these needs are an expensive addition to already mounting bills. Due to this fact, families are unable to address these needs and experience significant decline in their quality of life.
Good. I like the part at your last sentence there. Due to these challenges, is that what you said?
Due to this fact.
Due to this fact. And that's where you're getting at the problem and what the need is. And that's where you would probably start to elaborate on maybe some more of the specifics, which I kind of heard you talking about earlier, whether they can't pay the bills or they're not keeping up with their children are suffering in school because they're not home, or the power's getting shut off, whatever it may be. Some of those very specific things, I think, could be great. So, does anybody else want to? No. All right, I won't beat you. But going through these 3, I think the facts and the number 2, the facts and the sources. Think about using facts like we talked about of going to the census or pulling statistics. I know you guys get great information coming from Komen about numbers and statistics and who's being served in Utah. Use some of that. There's no reason you can't use that in your own grant application to underscore the need and then compare to your own data. I think that's really, there's no reason you can't. It doesn't have to be your own data, but there's other places you could pull it from. And then number 3, I wanted to just touch on where it says define the audience by age, gender, location, ethnic background. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. Those are numbers, again, that if you have the time and you know where to look, the census is a great place. The state health department has some of those numbers. I know Komen sends you great numbers. Keep them somewhere that I know you guys come across them, but they'd be great to put in a file or have pinned to your board. And that's data you can use. You don't have to create new data just when they're asking for it. You know that there are X number of women. There are a sliver of men actually being served with this. Or where are they? Are they on the west side? Are they in this zip code? Are they Summit? In Wasatch County, that's been a new area of growth and understanding that data. They didn't have data up in Summit, Wasatch County about breast cancer survivors, but they had numbers about the general population. And the health department did have some, but I think they're growing on that. So look, I think what I'm trying to say is, spread your eyes wide and look for some places you can find some numbers to support your own case without taxing yourself and creating surveys or spreadsheets that will take more time for you. So on the back, I will not, in the interest of time, I think, we'll just briefly go over these and I'll talk through them. Number 4, putting a human face. I think this isn't something maybe you can do right here, but those are great. You all have wonderful stories, and I know from reading some of the grant applications, some of you have done a great job of saying, so-and-so was a single mother and she didn't have resources and we were able to come in and support her and this is how we did it. Those stories, and I know you're limited when you get into GEMS and you have to answer all these questions, those stories though are really a great demonstration of the work you do without having to talk about numbers, without having to have a lengthy narrative. You can tell a story of someone that you've helped in a way that can exemplify your program and what you do. And so think about that as you're telling stories to your donors, you're telling stories to the media, you're telling stories to your staff, but there's no reason they can't be in your grant narrative too, and that's a great way to show your story without getting bogged down in some of the finer details.
Is that part of the testimonies?
Yeah.
In a certain place of the proposal, or there are some proposals that specifically
Sure.
you can put something here?
Sometimes, yes. I don't know enough. There are sections, I think putting it in, and I don't have all your questions in front of me, so I'm going to apologize for that. But maybe Leanne can jump in and correct me.
Yeah, I was going to say, the narrative piece of our application is limited. I mean, you have limited characters, and so you kind of have to figure out where you want to tell those types of stories. If you did indeed want to attach a testimonial, you can do that in the goals and objectives section. There's a place to upload, a testimonial maybe about that particular objective. So,
so if you're trying to serve,
be the place to do it.
So if you're trying to serve single Hispanic mothers, and you had a testimony or a story of a woman who'd come to you and needed help, that would be a great story to add in there. Certainly you want to make sure they're relevant to what you're doing and what you're asking for. But yeah, put them in, or even like you said, just the testimony, just a quote. I do that a lot when I'm writing because it's a great way to break up the long narrative, because even though I do this professionally, it's like, okay, I don't know, this is getting a little long for me. Throw in a quote and say, we heard from a recent survivor who told us that this program made a difference. And they're just 2 or 3 sentences. I don't know what I would have done without you. My children are so grateful, end quote, and then continue. And you can just kind of pop it in, and that's a nice way to break it up, but also put a human face to what you're doing. And it's a nice way, if you don't have data, if you don't have these other things available to you in the way you want, the testimonies you do have. And you can change names, or you can say anonymous. There does not need to be an actual name put with it. And certainly in your situation, that's understandable. And then the last one, number 5, what is the solution to the problem? And that's the biggest thing to get out of the needs statement. Okay, so we know what the problem is, we know who you're serving, we know that there's a gap. How are you going to solve it? And as a reviewer, that's what we want to see. We get that people need help, and we get that there's these amazing survivors out there, and we get that you guys do great work, but what's your solution to all this? And in the competitive, I guess I don't want to say too competitive, but you're competing against each other for grant funding. You're competing against other organizations, and you want to stand out with the best solution. And so make sure you really are clear about what you are doing to solve the problem, not just your existence as an organization. And that's going to be a big piece of your application. Any questions on the needs statement? We kind of ran through it quickly because I'm trying to give you lots of good information to take home with you. But you'll see it, certainly we're talking about Komen today, but there are other places you're going to look for funding. There's other places that fund you. And they're going to say, what is your need, or give me a statement of need, or you'll see some questions like that. And once you write this out, if you take the time to do this while you're doing Komen, you can use it for other applications. You can pop it in other places. And so think about that. Or vice versa. If you're writing for to IHC, there's no IHC here, that would be weird. If you're writing to them for funding, and they do have a question like that, then think, oh yeah, I could save myself some time, and I can use some of this narrative when I get to Komen. So think about that. Even though you're a small shop, if you get this needs statement put together, and it's usually about a paragraph, and there's some samples that I can pull for you, and there's some resources at the end of these slides that you'll be able to see. So it's a really helpful thing, and then also a really great thing to be able to share with your staff and your board. If you're having a board meeting and you want to be very clear about what you're doing, and they want to know what they're asking for, this is a great tool to use. Any questions?
Oh, I have one question.
Yeah.
So right now, our organization is based out of Salt Lake City, but we are looking at expanding with satellite offices in Utah County and in the Ogden area.
In cancer wellness.
Yeah. Which means a pretty significant jump in our cost to function. So when you're taking a move like that, do you ask current funders for more money based on the need because now you're serving 2 areas, or do you write separate grants for different locations?
It depends, is my answer to you. It depends on the model that you set up. If you are siloing those satellite offices to have their own budgets, to have their own administration, to have a completely kind of, not completely, but somewhat of an autonomous operation, then it might be wise to look at doing separate grant applications. That being said, if you're still applying under the same 501c3 as the same organization, you probably can't do that. And so as you're starting...
That's what I wondered about. I'm
yeah.
like, how does that work?
So like someone like the Girl Scouts, for example, is just something that pops into mind. So they have had a lot of changes, but that besides that, they had their offices in Utah County and they have offices in northern Utah, and they were their own operations. Even though they were Girl Scouts of Utah, they had their own director, they had their own 501c3 to apply for funding, and so they could do that and manage that separately. I think if you're going to start out, it's an extension of your services, and so you would be under the same, you as Cancer Wellness Salt Lake would say this is an extension of our program, and then once you're established and you know what your funding needs are, you know kind of how many people are actually coming to you for services, not who needs your services, then you might be able to branch out a little bit and do an independent grant application. But in the application, you could say, we are applying for $10,000 for Salt Lake, $2,500 for Utah County, $2,500 for Weber County. And then in your program budget, you'd go back and say, this is how the dollars stack up.
Okay.
And this is where we're going to spend the money. And then when you get to your reporting phase, you're going to have to be responsible for saying, we did spend $2,500 in Weber and we can prove it. We did spend $2,500 in Utah.
Report separately for each area.
You wouldn't necessarily report separately, but you would have to be accountable to that $2,500, literally with receipts and transactions, and with if you're paying salary, hours that you spent with the client that went towards the salary. So maybe it was 10 hours a month is what it covered for someone to go down there and work with them, and you would just need to prove that with your reporting. So does that make sense? Okay. All right. So yeah, the needs statement, like I said from the beginning, you guys are all here because you know how to write a grant. You know what the grant looks like. You obviously are successful because you've received funding, but the needs statement is something that can always help you improve your application and help you refocus and recenter the efforts that you're making as a program and how you want to articulate that to the funder. I think we lost her. Okay. All right. So the next fun part that we're going to talk about that I mentioned at the beginning is goals and objectives. Who gets hung up when it says goals and objectives? Everyone says, define your goals, tell me what your goals are, and then what are your objectives of that goal? I do. I honestly do. And I'm going to show, I still do, because it's such a fluid dialogue when you're reading. And some applications use the terms very loosely. I think Coleman does a good job of saying this is what we want from you. But some places maybe don't have the most qualified application writer, or they've used a term that's now changed. And so you get in there and you're like, wait, am I counting? What are my goals? And so I truly, even after all these years, I have a sheet that I remind myself of because I get bogged down in it. So your objectives, and this is a really important part of your program description. We've talked about the need statement. Now we're going to talk about the so what of that. So there's your need. This is who you're going to serve. This is your solution. The so what. So and I can't remember the exact language, so you have to forgive me there, but in the application that you guys are responsible to Coleman for, it does ask you for objectives and goals separately. Your objectives are measurable, and they're the outcomes of your program. So that's a good way to think about it. They're specific, they're concrete, they're achievable, and your goals are kind of what you're going to accomplish. We're going to serve, we can go back to that sheet I gave you. We're going to serve, or we're going to improve reading scores with elementary school students. Okay, what are we measuring though? So these are really, I think, they'll define a good and a great application. If you do your objectives well and you do your goals well, you're absolutely going to stand out against the other applications. If you're meshing them, if you're putting in a lot of fluffy language to try and get around the fact that you haven't defined your objectives and your goals, it shows. And so I've given you a few samples here that I think are helpful. Yeah.
Sometimes objectives are hard to differentiate from activities.
Uh-huh.
So what is the difference? Because when you say objective, you have to say, I'm gonna serve 50 people during
Right. Doing this activity.
So
We're and the next couple slides I'll get to. So how you're going to do it is your method, and we'll talk about that. The objective is what you're measuring and how you're measuring it, or what you're measuring, and then your activity would be the method that you're going to achieve the objective. And so here, I'll give you some samples, which I always think are the best. So the goal, and I did this non-Komen related so that anybody can understand it, but our program will help children read better. That's our goal. Does anybody want to share a goal from their program? To put this in Komen terms. Our program will
Improve quality of life.
Okay. So your objective, and this is where you get more descriptive, our program will assist 50 children in improving their reading scores by 1 grade level, and this is, they get a little bit into the methods. Okay, another sample maybe. So we can see that the objective here was specific, concrete, measurable. We want to see when your reporting comes in, we want to see that they served 50 kids, and if they didn't, why not?
Well, okay, I have a question about this. I've worked on the funding side too, and we're in Salt Lake County, and they're really big on impact.
Yeah,
so
and we're not talking about that word.
Well, because this is where, you know what I mean, and I've done less foundational grants, but a lot of governmental grants.
Yeah, this is absolutely.
And so to me, we're not measuring the 50 children because the 50 children is just the output.
Mm-hmm.
To me, we're taking that number and then looking at who has improved at 1 grade level, and that would be the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Are you just making sure that,
yes.
you know?
Yes,
Okay.
so your objective is you're going to serve the 50 children,
right.
But
yes.
You want to make sure
the measurable part is who has
their 1 grade level has gone up.
Okay.
And the standardized reading test is how you're going to do that. And then the timeline being 6 months. So yeah, so you have, your objective is that they're going to take out the 50 children. Our after school program will improve their reading scores by 1 grade level. But in order to measure it,
you use the 50
children. So specific, concrete, and achievable. And achievable is a good, I like the word achievable because it reminds me of capacity. Can we actually do it? Like you said, maybe we can't serve 50 people or 50 kids. And the goals being a little more abstract.
In the case of survivors that are going through a stress management therapy.
Yeah.
So how can I demonstrate that the stress level are lower by interviews, assessment?
You could, and I don't know enough about your program to be too specific, but you could do a survey or an interview prior to the therapy, or the program or the session that they went through, and then afterwards, and see if there's a change in their mood, in their feeling of healthiness, wellness. Do they have improved attitude? Are they feeling generally more positive? And it doesn't have to be long. It could be 4 or 5 questions. and you could put it in an Excel spreadsheet to measure that. But yeah, I would do it before and after.
Even on
Did you everybody hear what she said? On a regular, yeah, so 1 to 5. Or 1 to 10, however. So here's another one. In the long term, and I took out the names, but it might be more confusing. It is ABC useful that the project level reduce gang involvement and gang-related crimes in Salt Lake City. So if you are trying to, I know some of you have applications where you talk about we're trying to reduce, we're trying to eliminate, or on the other end, we're trying to improve healthy behaviors or improve wellness. I thought this was a good one. So, and this, we'll talk about doing the survey. Our program will maintain an average 80% attendance rate and targeting youth for all program-related activities, the timeline being 6 months. And a timeline is an important thing to include too, because I think it shows when you're measuring it, but it's also a good reminder as an organization. We can't just let this go on. We've got to measure it ourselves too. Put that on paper. Okay, so do we feel like we know what goals and the difference between that is? I think truly being able to define that separately, and Stacey had a really good point, understanding what you're actually measuring and the impact of that is going to make a difference to the reviewer, because reviewers, you have to think, I mean, it's me, I'm not you guys doing the heavy lifting every day. Reviewers are generalists, so they're going to usually understand everything you're talking about, but you're going to have to define it for them. You're going to have to explain exactly what you're doing and how in order for them to see the impact.
And can I just jump in a little bit, Kara? That concept of impact is something that we're looking at much more in depth here at Komen. There's going to be some different reporting and different ways to look at the impact of the programs. You know, again, you served 100 or 50 kids, so what?
Yeah.
You know, so they came in red.
It doesn't mean that
that they improved their scores at all. So yes, we are actually looking at that as well. So I think I've talked to everybody about this, and this shouldn't be a surprise, but yeah. So there is going to be much more of a focus on our side because we want to understand our impact as well.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, any questions on this? Okay, and then getting to what I was talking about with the method. So the activity is the word you used. The method describes what will take place to achieve your objectives. So you're going to talk about how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and why you're going to do it. And that explanation is going to justify the data that you have there. And it's a really important thing, especially the when, the be, and the timeline. Thinking in terms of how do I actually get these kids to improve their reading scores? And how do I get women to come in and improve their mood? Or how do I get them to come in and sign up for wellness classes? Or how do I do that? And then the measurement. And then the why. Again, like Leanne's saying, okay, so what? Really being able to describe not just the why you're doing it, but why you've chosen this method. Why is this piece going to help you achieve that objective?
So would that be a point like, for instance, if I was talking about our body program,
Oh, right.
We know statistically acupuncture is very successful in treating neuropathy and other side effects of chemo treatment.
That's your why.
That's my why.
And you just said it to me in one sentence, and that's all you need to say. We've chosen acupuncture to, as the preferred method because we know ... Okay. And to me as a reviewer, I'm going to go, oh, because I wouldn't know that. I generally assume acupuncture is good and that it's healthy and that it's like a good holistic thing. I get that.
Until you have somebody that's being focused needles
Right.
in a doctor's office,
Right.
and you say, we want you to come get focused more needles,
Right.
and then you have to have
Yeah.
an explanation.
Yeah, and there you go. And so it's like, okay, now that you've given me that data and that why, I get it. And it adds some credibility to you, truly, by saying that. It's like, oh, they kind of know what they're talking about. It's reasonable and it's true. Stacy, did you have?
I was just thinking, would you look at the barriers in this section then? You know, like, or would you do that more in the narrative?
I think it depends.
Need, I guess.
You know, I didn't get into that in these pieces I'm talking about because it depends on the grant application.
Right.
Sometimes you have barriers lumped in with what is your need and what are the barriers to achieving that. Like that's one question. Or it's a completely separate question after goals and objectives where they say, what are the barriers to achieving your goals?
Right.
So I could come back or I could provide you with guidance on barriers. But I think that's,
Thinking for foundation.
yeah, no, I think that's a
Specific
shift.
to the-
Yeah, that's a shift from government to that because they want to know. But I can talk about that just for a second. So barriers, that's something you want to talk about. And I think you're all kind of saying it on the backside of what we're talking about. What are the barriers to achieving that goal? Think about that. There may be a question on the application about that. There may be a question in the reporting that says what barriers did you come across that made it so you couldn't achieve your goal and why. So talking about the things that are going to be hard for you, like the funding, or we didn't have transportation to get to Utah County. We didn't have a liaison in Weber County to help us set this up. Think about the barriers. And that might go back to the very beginning when you're talking about ideation and, okay, can we actually achieve this? And but I think that's an important thing that you'll see lumped in. So thank you for bringing that up, Stacey. Lumped in a lot with your goals and objectives and what are the barriers. So be thinking of that in your process. And then the project description, I just put in here a reminder again about the timeline. The timeline is truly, even if it's just in words, visually it helps the reviewer understand your start and your finish. So 6 months or it's going to be a year. And I know a lot of you already do a really good job from reading the applications, and you don't have with GEMS the ability, like sometimes you do, like, oh, you could create this great timeline with a graphic or, just a line and put some marks on it. But giving the reviewer an understanding of when you're going to start. We're going to start this project in September of 2015, and we plan to accomplish it by August 31st of 2016. And being able to say that these are the goals we're going to achieve in 12 months or 6 months, and then it also gives you a great focus for doing your reporting. Well, I only need the data for 6 months, or I need the data for 12 months, and understanding that. So, does that make sense? It's kind of just a throw in to think about. Let's see. Okay, we're going to jump into a little bit of just what I call kind of peekaboo comments about program evaluation. A myth that I wanted to bust that I love reminding people about is evaluation is not done at the end of your project. Your reporting is done at the end of your project, but your evaluation is not. And so that's something, as you are creating your program, to be thinking about, how am I evaluating the effectiveness of this all the time? So you had mentioned you're going to do a survey before and after. That's your evaluation, but you don't do it at the end of the Coleman grant. Oh, the reporting is due next week. I better hurry and go find that person and do a survey with them. If you build the evaluation protocols into how you do your program, by the time you get to reporting, you're going to have it in front of you. And I think as a small organization, as a busy organization, no one here, maybe, I don't know your exact title, Stacy, because you're the new Roxy, but is just a grant writer. Is anybody here just the grant writer? And I know you're not at 4th Street, so there's no way. You're kind of, sort of, but you still work with clients. You still do other things. So you're not just in your office with grant writing books and people bring you papers and you're just there. You do other things. And so to be able to have this at your fingertips by the time you're 3 or 4 weeks out from reporting for Komen, it's going to save you a lot of time. And it's also going to be able to help you with your program staff go, oh, we're going to need more money next year. And I can tell that now.
One thing I just want to throw out there, because this is how we got our evaluation tool refined to where it is. We were able to partner with the statistics program at BYU, and they created our evaluation system, and it is stellar.
It was on my notes.
So take advantage of
interns,
education programs
college,
like that, because they worked with us for about 3 years, start to finish, and we have a very effective evaluation tool that not just evaluates our programs, but also us as an organization, and we're getting that feedback every few months from everybody that participates in our services.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's an absolutely great point. If you don't have the capacity as an organization, or the money to bring in a consultant, or money to bring in a part-time staff person to help with this, look at the programs at the university. The MPA program at the U does a lot with statistics, and they have people who have to do internships or capstone projects. They have to do thesis projects where they have to work with an organization from start to finish. And so I think going to them and saying, hey, we need some support with this, would there be someone there who can help you? And
They're amazing.
Phenomenal what they can come up with. But yeah, look at your resources if you need someone to come in. When they're trying to graduate, they're more than eager to find a good project to jump onto. So we kind of talked about this. Include the evaluation plan in your proposal. So make sure you say how you're going to. I'm going to do a survey. I'm going to do an interview, and I'll show you an example in just a minute that I pulled from another grant application. And make sure you link your evaluation back to your objectives. So if you're trying to measure a certain, like you said, is it a scale that I really want, or am I trying to measure how many kids? Like, understand that your evaluation tool needs to support your objectives, so that you're not trying to do a survey, but when you can't reach the clients, or it's too confidential, so you couldn't share the data anyway. So think creatively about how you want to do that. Choose the tools that are right for the project. Honestly, I've worked with a lot of big and small organizations. You would be surprised how many big, and she's not here anymore, so I can't pick on her, but Huntsman, Excel spreadsheets, honestly, is one of the tools that people use to manage the data. It doesn't have to be a fancy database program. It doesn't have to be within your donor software. It's helpful if it is, because people can access it, but as long as you can put the numbers and the data and the quotes and the testimonials or whatever you're gathering in a place that everybody can access them, then it's going to be a tool that works for you. And make sure you know exactly how you're collecting the data. There's a lot of times you'll read an application that'll say, well, we're going to talk to people after they come out of the session, or we're going to go or we're going to have a community meeting and pass out some surveys. And it's just very vague. And as a reviewer, you quickly understand that they really have no idea how the data is going to be collected, but the question was on the application and they had to put something in the box. So if you could understand in 2 or 3 sentences even how it's going to be collected, it's going to make a difference for you, because you're going to have an understanding as an organization, which is the biggest thing. It's not just about putting it on the paper. It's about you knowing as an organization how you're going to do it, and then how it's going to be used. Okay, you put it on a spreadsheet and you've got all the numbers, other than telling Komen what you did, which is great. So you went through a lot of effort to collect that, and you have a tool that's now integrated into your program. What are you going to do with it? And thinking about that piece of how you're going to use it, I think, is a very smart way of growing your program and understanding the capacity of your program. You can say, next year we'll be able to look at our data and decide if we need to serve the same population, or if there's, maybe we thought we were going to serve all women, and suddenly like 60% was men, and all of a sudden they found out about our program and they showed up. well then that's going to change how you model your program the following year. So being able to articulate how you're going to use the data is just as important about how much data you're collecting.
I have one quick question. And it's more of a general question.
No, it's okay. And I'll give you a sample of some of this too, sorry.
As you're going through different grant applications and everywhere is kind of different,
Just a little.
when they give you X number of characters, if you really truly can say what you need to say in 80 characters, when they give you 1,000, do you need to feel obligated to use those up?
My advice to you is no. If you are clear and concise and to the point, I would much rather read 80 characters that said exactly what you're going to do than 1,000 characters that did this and never got to the point. And to be honest with you, it's great. I think in my next life I've decided I'm going to write grant application, like the format of them, because some of them are really ridiculous and they don't give you enough space in the right spot. So it's great sometimes when you have 2,500 characters and you can put in your narrative and you can put in some of the things we're talking about, the testimonies and the quotes, and you can do that.
You really need
and that's where you need them.
You're like, you want me to put 1,000
and then they do.
on this?
And then, yeah, and then they give you 2,500 characters for a three-sentence answer. And so what makes more sense is that you know exactly what you're trying to say and that you say it clearly. I would much rather read 3 sentences than, honestly, it's like, we want to know that you know what you're doing. If it takes you 1,000 words to say that and you don't ever get to the point, then I know right off the bat, you probably don't know what you're doing, and I'm not sure if I'm going to trust you with the grant funding, to be honest. So, but if you say, no, we do this is how we do it, done. If we wanted further explanation, we'd either find it somewhere else or we'd come to you, but yeah, no. The truth behind some of the grant application creation is that sometimes as a company that went to the foundation, and maybe from the funder side you can talk about it, like they sold them this great program to create a grant application, and they just said, oh, 2,500 characters, that seems nice. Other times they actually put a lot of effort into it and say, well, we don't want to read more than that. We don't have time with the 350 applications we get every quarter to read more than that. And it's a test of you. It truly is a test of how articulate you can be in a short amount of time. So, is that a long-winded answer to your very short question?
It was perfect. It was what I was hoping you would say.
Okay, yeah. And I do that too. I just answer it's like when you're doing it's been a very long time, but your SATs, your ACTs, and they give you pages and use an extra page if necessary, and you're like, I have nothing more to say. I don't want to use an extra page.
They try to link, like when you do the, I don't know the foundation grants like this. You have a score. Do you put scores to different areas? Yeah, and then they link it to the amount of characters, according
Sometimes
to the
they
score, which isn't always.
That's not always
what
fair,
we did, because we wrote our own RFPs, is we would give a page limit, and then whoever was writing the grant could determine how much they wanted to put in each area, as long as it was concise and answered the question.
Which is smart. And if you have the capacity to read that
Right,
and review
it.
And you're not overwhelmed.
Board,
so that makes sense too. Yeah, it's a whole behind the curtain. It's a very interesting world of creating grant applications.
So just for the record, writing less in a text box for us does not count against you.
Yeah,
there is no internal score in the system itself. The scores only come from the reviewers.
From the reviewers of what the quality of.
Yes, based on quality only.
Should be.
Yes, absolutely.
It should be. That's the right answer. Yes, but it isn't always.
I didn't realize that someone would do that to score. You didn't fill it out enough. You didn't write enough. What? That's crazy.
Okay, so I just did a quick sample to follow up on the objectives versus the evaluation piece. So this is the objective we had before about the 80% attendance rate for youth. And then this was the measurement they had for it of how they would evaluate and measure the program. So each team will sign up for a schedule of programs. The individuals in charge of the program will take attendance before they begin, which is kind of like we were talking about. And I love this. The administrative assistant will enter the data in Excel. Counselors will monitor the youth, and then they will initiate follow-up, and here's our timeline again, 6 months following the program. So, and this whole proposal actually got very high marks, so this is a sample bit. It seems obvious when you're writing something. It's like, oh, well, they should know that they will enter the data into Excel. As a reviewer, that's awesome. I want to read that and be like, okay, they know exactly what's happening with those numbers. And they know who's doing it and who's responsible for it, that administrative assistant. And then what are they doing with the data? They will initiate follow-up. They will have future analysis of the program. So it's all in there. Make sense? Did we cover it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oops. Okay, before we get to that part, I'll leave this up because it's kind of helpful as we're talking. As I mentioned at the beginning when I came in, Leanne and I really wanted to give you guys some bits and pieces that make a strong winning application. There are a lot of things we did not cover today in the grant proposal writing process because you already know a lot of it. And like I said, you're here because you are successful, but I think we all can do better. I can do better, and I push myself to do that. I think we're going to see with you guys specifically, funding's getting tightened. So you're going to have a lot more competition. People are now finding out more about the opportunities to apply for funding. So you're getting new organizations who are interested in applying who haven't been in the mix before. So there's your competition again. And I think these are the pieces that I find strengthen winning proposals. They're the ones that, as a reviewer, I grade more thoroughly, whether because I've been tasked with doing that, or these are the areas that I just really want to know more about and I would wish would be written better or have more data with them or really understand the measurement piece. And so that's why we've decided to share those with you today. But are there any questions before I get on to the next piece about anything we've talked about today, anything maybe I didn't cover that I could either direct you to the right information or provide you with some insight on when it comes to writing your proposals that, I wish I would know this, or did I just stress everyone out about their upcoming proposal? When is it due again?
October. Well, it opens in October.
Opens in October.
Yeah, so they got until November to.
So you got a month to get all your data together. Start working on it. Any questions? Anything you wish? No? Okay, I've successfully scared you. All right. Well,
empowered. That's what it is. You've empowered them.
That's what I hope you walk out of here feeling like I can do this. And so we're going to talk about the responsibilities just to kind of cap everything off today. So as a grantee, I'm going to start with that side, that it's your responsibility as a grantee. And I put responsibilities because it's important. You have to, I think about this, and I'm not always reminded because I'm so engrossed in the grant writing process. I'm like, I need that $12,000 for this program, or I need that. But what I have to remind myself is somebody donated that money, and especially to Coleman. Somebody wrote a check. Somebody got up in the rain and ran the race and raised their money and put together a team. Somebody might be a survivor who's donated the money for you to help another survivor. There is someone on the other end of your dollar, and there's a responsibility to that. And whether it's with Coleman, whether it's with someone like Eccles or Huntsman, somebody, whether they're investing their money, they started somewhere with a philanthropic mission, and somebody wants you to do good with that money. So there's a responsibility to you to do that. But in order to spend the money wisely, the logistical part of that is make sure you review the application and address any concerns or questions like we've been talking about today. Where would I put, the barriers, or where would I put a testimony or a quote or a story? Read through it as soon as you get it when it opens in October and kind of highlight. I always go through and highlight areas or questions that I think are going to be difficult to answer or that I'm going to need extra time on. And I'll talk to my client about it, or if we have a question that we need to come back to Coleman or we need to come back to the funder and say, what are you asking for on this? Is it goals and objectives or is it barriers? and be responsible for that. So as soon as you get that application, make sure you review it. The second one being to communicate the use of your funding, and that's what I was talking about with the donors. Leanne cares that you get your reporting on time and that you communicate that, but she and Kate also have a responsibility to share with the board and with other donors what you're doing. So there are times that they take the data directly from your grant applications and your reports, and they share that with their donors, with the board, and with the public about the effectiveness of this organization. So it is so important to be truthful and have the good data and make sure that you follow all the guidelines that they're giving you. And then timely reports. Report, again, and this is just to the point I said, having that report is a tool of measurement of how effective you guys are doing. It's also a really neat way to find out all the great things that are happening in the community. But as an organization, Komen has a responsibility on the other side of the table to share that reporting information. And so we need to make sure not only is it on time, because Leanne has a deadline on her side as well to make sure that that's reported on the other side of things. So if you're having trouble with the reports, if you didn't get the data you wanted, I know she's a very busy one-person shop, and I never expect to call at 4:30 on a day that a report's due at 5 o'clock and get a good answer. And she may be able to answer the phone, but you might be the third or fourth person to call. And I think if you want her time and you need her to be an engaged communicator in the process, give her some time. If she needs to go dig out an answer for you or dig into the problem that's logistical with the GEM system, she's good. She's really good at what she does, but she can't pull all those rabbits out of the hat at the same time. So give her some time, because she's got probably some blocks on her end that she's got to work through. And then just follow the guidelines is the biggest thing. There's sometimes, and it happens when you're working on a grant at 11 o'clock at night because it's due the next day, you're like, well, maybe I'll just throw this in there and they'll understand that I was meaning this instead. It's not, it's going to show in your application. So if they ask, like you said, if they ask for a short answer, then give a short answer. If you have more room, then think about how you can do that. But don't fudge the guidelines because it's going to show. And then Komen, you guys have all these great responsibilities, but you guys are also, they have responsibilities to you because they have given you the opportunity to apply for funding, and there are things that you can expect reasonably for them to do for you. So if you have problems with the submission, if you have problems with understanding a question, if you cannot get things to save or you cannot get it to refresh, then call, absolutely. I have no problem picking up the phone to call someone like Eccles or Huntsman or some of the bigger places, and they're always willing to help. They would much rather have me call and say, I cannot get this to work, or I do not understand this question, or did you know that you sent last year's grant application to me? They would much rather, which they've done, because they're they get in a hurry and they have strange deadlines, and like, so this isn't the same thing, and they would much rather know about that and be able to help. So always, ask for help, just maybe not 11:59. Leanne is absolutely responsible and willing and able to help with any technical issues in the process. And she may not always have the answer, so if she needs time to talk to someone higher up or on the technical side to fix that for you. And so that's what giving her the time is a good idea. And then she has, like I said, a responsibility to the donors on the other side of the table. And they expect things of her just as you expect things of her. And I'm pointing out her because I know she does all this work, and I know Kate's involved too, so I'm not trying to exclude you, but I'm guessing they're going to call Leanne before they're going to call Kate. So, well, and that's where it is the responsibility to the donors, and that's a big part of Kate's job is getting out there. And so she's going to work with Leanne and say, hey, did you get that in? How many grants did we receive? I'd love to tell the board how many grants, how many potential grants that we got in for this round, and if that's not all in the system, then it's going to be hard for Kate to do her job. to the donor. Or if there's a donor who says, hey, you know, we'd love to see that you got more grant applications this year. We're going to come in and give you some more money if we can see that you've broadened your pool. And those are numbers that are important, which happens with some big donors. Yeah, it does happen with a big donor where they come in and say, hey, you know, if we're seeing you do good things, we'll bring more money to the table. We would love, that's what we want to see happen for you guys. And then the last part, which I think is important, and it's really hard when you have personal relationships with people at certain foundations, because they care about your program, and I'm not just talking about Komen, but in general, they care about your program. They call and they ask how things are going, or you'll run into them at an event around town, or they'll come to one of your special events, or you run into the farmer's market, or whatever it may be. You get relationships with these people. And so maintaining the neutrality is sometimes there's a really thin line of understanding this person really is supportive of what I do as an organization, and understanding that they have to be absolutely neutral in how they communicate with you when it comes to any of the technical issues or the submission guidance, or if you're looking for guidance on how you should frame some of your program narrative. Leanne has to give, it's like having a busload of children, I suppose. She needs to give, you know, when your kids go on a field trip and you're like, I want the teacher to give every kid, you know, don't lose my child, right? That they make sure that they're watching all the kids at the same time. And that's kind of what she's trying to do. She's got to be neutral and she's got to be fair so that everybody gets equal play, and that your competition is with each other and not impaired by something that she said to another organization. So yeah, it's kind of a busload of kids.
I love all the kids.
Yes, and that's, you know, what with your child's teacher, like,
That's right.
And that's what it is. You're like, okay, I want to make sure they go on the field trip. They're not going to lose my child, and that everyone's going to be treated equally. And that's kind of what has to happen here. So I think these are always important points, because honestly, I get caught up in it, like, hey, Erin over at Eccles Foundation, how's it going? We're working on this program, and then, you know, she tries to give you enough information, and you know where she's being neutral, and you have to remember, oh, right, she has a job to do. She's, you know, has 10,000 other programs that they fund, so that's her responsibility. So,
That's
sum
great.
it up?
That's fabulous.
Okay. Are we empowered now? No. We'll keep trying. All right. Well, maybe this will empower you a little bit. So I put together just a list of additional resources that these are my absolute go-tos. If you, maybe Stacy, you have others from the government side, but these are just a few. Obviously the Foundation Center, which we talked about. But if you have not visited GrantSpace, is anybody familiar with grantspace.org? So it's an offshoot of the Foundation Center, and it's absolutely free. They have sample budgets. They have sample proposals. And I realized that what you do in the Komen sense when you're submitting an application is very different than what you would submit to a family foundation or a private foundation. Your application is online. It's very specific. They're asking for some pretty technical information that you're providing when it comes to those outcomes. But GrantSpace has free webinars. They have books. They have sample proposals, and then there's critiques of the proposals of what worked well in them. Some experts will come in and give their guidance on that. It's a great place when you kind of need that, like, pick-me-up, or you need, you know, some of these sample things that we've talked about today. There were several in there when I was just skimming before I came in that were related to diabetes organizations, which isn't quite what Komen does, but a lot of the language was similar. You know, you're serving this very specific group, talking about wellness. So there's some things that could relate to the type of things you're doing. I just can't say enough good things about it. It started about 4 years ago, and it's been a really great resource. And it started because they want grantees to be the best proposal writers they can be with the limited resources they have. So check that out. Locally, the Utah Society of Fundraisers and Utah Nonprofits Association are places you can go for resources. They, as well as the Grant Professional Association for the Utah chapter, if you wanted someone to review your application or help, and a consultant or somebody it it wouldn't work for you to have them come in, I would try getting a hold of GPA or USFR, and somebody there, either on their board or on one of their education committees, would absolutely be willing to either connect you or work with you. And I know GPA specifically, it's a really strong group of grant professionals here in Utah. So that's a resource to look at. And then if you want any additional training with the Nonprofit Academy at the U, they do grant training courses, which I realize is an extra expense, but sometimes they do them at a discounted rate for larger groups, or they have special events going on where you can go in and check in with them. They also have, and not just grant writing, I should clarify, it is nonprofit, so it's board governance, finance, if you have questions about budgets. They actually do every now and again, it's not on their regular calendar, but have an evaluation course that you could take like from 9 to noon or something, and give you some ideas
They
about
do
that.
scholarships too.
They absolutely, yep, they do scholarships. So if you're interested in doing their full program or just a class, you can apply for those scholarships. And I know right now is actually when they're looking at applications, so that would be a good place. And one more that I did not put on there is United Way, to look at some of the training. They partner with UNA and they partner with the Academy. They get a fair amount of money from American Express, who has an education pot. So they do a lot of training for nonprofit people throughout the year. And then the last one, just some references. One of my absolute favorite books for anybody, whether you're doing programs, whether you're doing, you are the grant writer, is the New World Grant Writing Handbook. There's samples, there's good and bad, this is why it doesn't work, it's thin.
That's the most
it's not a
important part.
paperweight, like it's a nice, she did a really good job compiling some good samples, and there's some great budget worksheets in there and things. Like it says, if this doesn't work for you, then this might work for you. This is how you should explain it. It's very, very well written and easy to understand. And then I have to plug, I spent a lot of time working in Minnesota, and their Council on Foundations and Council on Nonprofits has a lot of free printable worksheets and handouts and articles about doing grants and things like that I think Utah's working on. They're doing a good job, but I absolutely use them as a resource when I'm looking for something I can't find. So hopefully, if you're not empowered by my scary presentation, these other resources will give you some places to go when you're trying to understand some of the questions or find ways to improve how you're talking about the things that you're doing.
And I would just like to add as well, as one of our responsibilities is putting together the RFA, so the request for applications. If stuff in there doesn't make sense and it's not clear, let me know. So, because I go through and edit it every single year to try to make it as clear as possible, because I do get questions, but let me know if stuff does not make sense. Don't muddle through. If it's seriously not clear, call me, email me, whatever, and let me know so that I can take that feedback for the next year, so I can make that correction for the next cycle.
Yeah.
It helps.
So do we have any other questions? Any curveballs we want to throw out?
Yeah.